Do you think it's possible to, within the panpsychism framework, to measure consciousness, or put another way, are some things more conscious than others in the panpsychist view?
It's a difficult question. I mean, I do see consciousness as dealing with consciousness an interdisciplinary task between something more experimental, which is to do with the ongoing project of trying to work out what people call the neural correlates of consciousness, what kinds of physical brain activity correspond to conscious experience. That's one part of it, but I think essentially there's also a theoretical question of more the why question. Why do those kinds of brain activity go along with certain kinds of conscious experience? I don't think you can answer that. Because consciousness is not publicly observable, I don't think you can answer that why question with an experiment. But they have to go hand in hand. And I mean, one of the theories I'm attracted to is the integrated information theory, according to which we find consciousness at the level at which there is most integrated information, and they try to give a mathematically precise definition of that. So on that view, probably this cup of tea isn't conscious because there's probably more integrated information in the molecules making up the tea than there is in the liquid as a whole. But in the brain, what is distinctive about the brain is that there's a huge amount of there's more integrated information in the system than there is in individual neurons. So that's why they claim that that's the basis of consciousness at the macro level. Now I like some features of this theory, but they do talk about degrees of consciousness. They do want to say there is gradations. I'm not sure conceptually I can kind of make sense of that. I mean, there are things to do with consciousness that are graded, like complexity or levels of information, but I'm not sure whether experience itself admits of degree. I sort of think something either has experience or it doesn't. It might have very simple experience, it might have very complex experience, but experience itself, I don't think it admits of degree in that sense. It's not more experience, less experience. I sort of find that conceptually hard to make sense of. But I'm kind of open-minded on it.
So when we have a lot higher resolution of sensory information, don't you think that's correlated to the richness of the experience? So doesn't more information provide a richer experience? Or is that, again, thinking quantitatively and not thinking about the subjective experience? Like you can experience a lot with very little sensory information, perhaps. Like, do you think those are connected?
Yeah. So there are features, characteristics here we can grade the complexity of the experience, and on the integrated information theory, they correlate that in terms of mathematically identifiable structure with integrated information. So roughly, it's a quite unusual notion of information. It's perhaps not the standard way one thinks about information. It's to do with constraining past and future possibilities of the system. So the idea is in the retina of the eye, there's a huge amount of possible states the retina of my eye could be in at the next moment, depending on what light goes into it. Whereas the possible next states of the brain are much more constrained. Obviously, it responds to the environment, but it heavily constrains its past and future states. And so that's the idea of information they have. And then the second idea is how much that information is dependent on integration. So in a computer where you have transistors, you take out a few transistors, you might not lose that much information. It's not dependent on interconnections. Whereas you take a tiny bit of the brain out, you lose a lot of information because the way it stores information is dependent on the interconnections of the system. So yeah, so that's one proposal for how to measure one gradable characteristic which might correspond to some gradable characteristic in qualitative consciousness. And maybe I'm being very pedantic, which is, philosopher's professional pedant. I just sort of don't think that is a quantity of experience. It's a quantity of the structure of experience, maybe, but I just find it hard to make sense of the idea of how much experience do you have? I've got, 5 units of experience. I've got 1 unit of experience. I don't know. I find that a bit hard to make sense of, but maybe I'm being just pedantic.